speaker, who is Dr. Raphaelle Bats, or PhD candidate.
I'm trying to have my PhD. I'm not.
Oh, very good.
I'm on.
Fabulous. And she is the conservateur de bibliothèques, which I did not say right, but the head librarian in the French National School for Library and Information Science. And she's in charge of International Relations Office and is teaching communication in libraries, signage and wayfinding, comparative international librarianship, participation, FabLabs, and serious games, new relations to the public. Preparing a PhD in Paris 7 in philosophy of sociology, or philosophy and sociology. And she's involved in a number of international associations such as IFLA, EUCLID, CFIBD, and a few others. And we're very thrilled to have you here today. I don't know, Michael, if you want to add any additional comments.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
People here will remember Heather Mullison, who was a friend of Raphaelle and made the introduction.
Fabulous. Well, without further ado, turn
Thank
it over to you. Thanks.
So,
before you begin, excuse me, could you tell us where the school is? Is it in Paris or in Lyon?
in Lyon.
Lyon. Okay, I was there.
It's the national one, but it's in Lyon.
Yeah.
So yes, thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak. I'm sorry, I'm a bit stressed, so my voice is a bit, but it will be okay.
We're a nice crowd. Don't worry. No worries at all.
What I would like to share with you today is some question I'm asking about a project I did with a colleague 2 years ago. It was a project about digital technology in academic libraries, and specifically the digital libraries in academic libraries in France. We wanted to work on this question, and we were interested with the question of communication. As Rebecca said, I'm teaching communication in libraries in France, and I was in charge also of the communication department in my former library, academic library of Lyon 1. And it seems obvious that we have no idea in France of the communication used to speak about the digital technology and the evolution of the digital technology in academic library to our patrons, and also to our president of university. So we wanted with my colleague to study this question, and within a study of the concepts used, like electronic, digital, because I don't know here if you make a difference between these two terms, but in France we share electronic and digital in resources, Web 2.0, things like that. So it was a project. But in fact, with the methodology, it was more difficult than that. We had a lot of difficulties that I will explain. And so in 2013, I began to work on this question of, was it possible really to do a history of 20 years of something, 20 years of the time where I'm living, and that it has a sense, a meaning to do this. So what I would like to present today is presenting the problematic of making a history of the present time, and the methodology we use to make this history of the present time of academic libraries in France. And I precise in France because really it's a very French context. And finally my results. So it will be the plan. So maybe first, if you have some questions, comments at any time, please interact. So for me, the first problem is what is the time? If I want to make an history of a very present time, 15 years ago or 20 years ago, what means time and what means different concepts like past and linearity of time and the stand back of the researcher in history and what is an archive and what is memory, of course. So maybe first beginning with past concept, I'm not a historian, so I did this research in I come from philosophy, so but I do history of philosophy, so maybe I'm on a bridge. But I was thinking that, yes, is that 15 years ago the past for me, or for academic library? It was the past, or what? So it needs we need to understand what is past really compared to present. And it means for me that we have to make a distinction between present and news and current news. It's two different things. We could say that current time, like news, it's a journalist question, but present, it's not necessarily journalist question. It's not the actuality. If we look for the historiography, we can see that for the beginning, Thucydide, for example. I don't know how you say it in English. Thucydide, the Greek researcher. Thucydide.
Oh, yeah.
In France, it's Thucydide. Thucydide, for example, was thinking about an history of the present time. He was describing the present time, his present time. And when doing that, he was making a kind of survey of the people today, in his today, explaining what was their civilization, what was their history, and he was in fact the first one to do history, geography, but also library archive, in fact. More in the 20th century, you know, maybe the ANAL. ANAL is a school, history school. They promote an history detached of the date and event. They say you don't do history with date and event, with timeline. You do history with thematics, with subjects. So there is a possibility to make some history with a time who is not a past time. Second thing about the stand back of the researcher. That's something we do know now, today, I think, as researcher, this problem of having time to produce. You know, we have so much to produce and produce and produce papers and papers and papers that it's sometimes very difficult to have stand back on our research. So in history, we used to think that we need time to see the past and so to have a scientific look on it. But I will quote Antoine Prost, who's a French historian. He's from one of the schools from History of Present Time. And he's saying, I will do a translation by my own, so it will not be very perfect, sorry. He said that we used to say that for writing a story, we need a stand back. But for him, it's taking the effects for the cause. It's not history that needs a stand back. It's history that creates the stand back. And believing that we need, that it's enough to live in the time goes for taking a stand back, for having a stand back is an illusion for Antoine Prost. He said that we need to make history for having the stand back. So it's in doing the history of this present time, for the 15 years ago, that we can have a look on what happened. And that is history for him. So the difficulty maybe is in the linearity, because when we have this a long stand back, we can see that history is not a line, it's not doing like this, but it's jump and mutation and cycles and things like that, like what saying Levi-Strauss. So the problem is that when I'm studying 15 years ago, 15 years of history from now, do I have enough time to see the jump and the mutation? And I will show you that we can, because of this object, because digital object is a specific object that is so fast, has so quick evolution, that we are now able to see the mutation. Maybe for other subjects and for other objects it's not possible, but for this kind of object we are already able to see some mutation and jumps. Another problem is the question of archives. The historians are working on archives, and I don't know here, but in France we have to wait 30 years before the opening of the archives. And I know that here, even for what is in the public domain, it's completely accessible. We need to wait 70 years for having the name of the people who, for the recensement, for example, every 10 years, when everyone... Census, yes, for the census. So the result is open now, but we have to wait 70 years for knowing who the people who fill the form and things like that. So we could say that because we don't have access to some of the archives, maybe it's not possible to make an history that would be done less than 30 years ago, or 70 years ago, or I don't know, it depends on the country. But in fact, this means that history will be only something about tracks, about what stay of the past. And that's, you know, I do history of philosophy, and I was working on Democritus. And if you know a bit Democritus, you know that we have nothing on it. We just have some sentences that other librarians, no, professional, other philosopher quoted him. They read him, and they say, Democritus said, chick, chick, up. And we read Aristotle, for example, we say, oh, Democritus said that. But in fact, we have no idea what he said really, because it's just what Aristotle read about Democritus. And same example, one of my sisters is in archaeology in a university. And the first exercise they do in class is taking a very common object we have now, like this, or a hairbrush, and asking, imagine you are 100 years ago, 100 years in the future, you have no idea of the context, what could it be? So, of course, we could do an history only with what left, what the history left, what the time left, but, sorry, I'm falling. But maybe it's building only the history on tracks, and we could also build the history on what is present, on what is now, and what is not just living, but just living. I don't know, living and living. Okay. And last point is a question of memory. There is a concern, of course, when we want to do some history of the present time, is that are we really on a scientific history or an affective history? And we used to think that memory is more a question of affect, and history a question of science. So that's, to be honest, I don't have really, it's just a question I have. I don't know if we can say that studying 15 years of academic library is a question of memory or a question of history. I don't think it's a question of memory because we don't have such you know, community challenge for memory, collective memory in this question. Maybe except for the community of librarians. So I don't know really how to answer that. But as I say, I'm not a historian. I'm just trying to fix my methodology. So there is two schools in France. I don't know here, but in France there is two schools. One is history, l'histoire du temps présent, so history of the present time, and the other one is called histoire immédiate. C'est immediate history. Immediate history. So you can already see that there is a difference, but they are very close for many things. First, they are close because they are both thinking that it's possible to have a scientific reasoning or discourse done during the living time of the historian. It's not because the events exists when I'm living that I can do a scientific work. So this question is very important for them. The second thing is that they assume a kind of subjectivity of the historian. The idea that because I live the event, and so maybe I will have this, I will not have this kind of stand back that I can have on the medieval question, on ancient question, and I feel like this question of affectivity, for example. So they have this idea that yes, there is a subjectivity of the historian, and we can have a scientificity with this subjectivity. They also think that there is no, it's maybe a bad translation, but raw historical fact or rough historical fact, something very, you know, just an historical fact you can take like this. There is nothing like this. There is all the time a context, of course, but also a view of the historian. Nothing is completely raw, like, I don't know, raw sugar or something like that. Nothing is completely like this in history. So on this, they are really the kits, we could say, of the annals. Also, they are really thinking that we have to not only working on archives, but also on living archives and living sources. So that's a big difference, of course, with another part of history. And we will see after the difficulty of that. So they are thinking that we have to find some witnesses. And they are also thinking that orality is something important in history. And not only, I don't know, letters or you know, what we find in archives, actually. So they are thinking about orality is important and witnesses are important. Finally, they think that it's possible to have, that's something very important, it's possible to have scientific discourse on an object with still building. So the building, the history of this object is not done. Like, I don't know, studying the French Revolution, you can say it's from this date to this date, and it's closed, so it's okay. No, they are thinking that every history is all the time something that is in continuing process. But there are differences. A very important difference is that for the history of the present time, they think that you can do history after the 30 years. Well, from the 30 years of opening the archive to now. So they think that you only can do with official archives and witnesses, but 30 years ago. They have this kind of shift. I don't know why, in fact. For me, it's a kind of strange, more on the immediate history, in fact. But they think that because they are thinking that their archives must have a kind of institutional label or brand. That's not the case of the immediate history. There are more for a diversity of sources. Could be for today, for example, could be Twitter, could be journals, everything. Second thing, so they have no limit of time, of course. For the immediate history, of course, they can do an history of, I don't know, the climate march, for example. It was 1 month before, and if they want to do the history of that, no problem. The third thing is that for the history of present time, it's a question of historians. So historians can do that. But for the immediate history, it's very multidisciplinary. So the name of the immediate history are some people, I don't know, you know, but some people like Jean Lacouture is a journalist, Benoît Verhaegen, it's a sociologist, Marc Bloch, it's an historian, René Raymond is a historian, Jean-François Soulet, sorry, is an historian too. But they are really thinking that we need that multidisciplinarity to think the immediate history. And that's interesting because, I don't know yet, but in France, you know, things are very on an academic level. We have, every discipline has a number. So for example, information science is a 71. History is the 15th and things like that. Or 22 if it's history of books and things like that. So you can't really go across the discipline, and specifically for publication. So that's very interesting when I say we have to make this kind of multidisciplinarity, but also because they say we have to work with journalists. And this is something very new for the historian. So, but it's not so easy, of course, because there is a lot of issues and we could say limits, in fact. First issues for me is the question of, for me and for them, because they quote this a lot of times, the question of having living sources. As I said, the problem is that they are living, in fact. And the fact they are living is that they can't say if they are agree or not with what you are writing. Of course, Robespierre can say anything. You can write what you want. It will not say anything. But the living sources, this is the problem. It's not really a problem, but it's a difficulty. For example, this historian of the present time and immediate time, they are working a lot on the Second World War and the resistance. You know? And they wrote some books, they interviewed some veterans and resistance. And there was a polemic a few years ago with, I forgot her name, sorry. Lucie Aubrac. Lucie Aubrac, she's a famous resistant in France. And there was a polemic because she said, I'm not agree. I don't have the same idea of yours. And she has the statutes to say, I was there, I'm witnesses, and I'm able to think that you're wrong. So that's very interesting because for the first time, we can see the historian as someone saying you're wrong, and it's very new. It's very different in science or in humanities because we're working on I don't know, sociology. Some people say I'm not agree, but that's the witnesses, your object is saying you're wrong, and that's very new. Just to show you, know this picture, I suppose, because for me it's quite new, I didn't know that. This is a picture you can understand, I think, when it has been taken, so in 2001, and the photographer was working for Magnum, and he took this picture in 2001, and he think, I will not publish it now, it's a bit problematic, so he published it in 2006, and as soon as he published it, a journalist called Rich write a paper saying that it's evident that young Americans are no more interested with what happened in our country and things like that. But what is interesting is that this guy on the picture sees one, and she sees this girl, they write a paper, and they say, no, it's not true. That's not what we were thinking. In fact, we were in shock. It's not obvious because there was the light and we are like this, but we didn't know these guys, and it was the first time we talked with them, and we were talking about what happens and things like that. So they say, it's totally wrong. And she said, I'm from the third generation, and everyone from my family is living here, and you can say that. And they say, you're completely wrong with your analysis. And he said, that was funny, he said, and, oh sorry.
Smart.
Very smart.
Too smart.
Too smart, yeah. And he said, I'm not a kid, I'm not a young American, I'm 40. That was his last thing. You're completely wrong, I'm 40. And that was funny because for me it's completely the example of the witnessing saying, I'm living. You can do like if I was not living. So it changed something about history. Henri Rousseau, who's a historian in France, is from the immediate history, is thinking that now with the globalization, with internet, etc., it's more easy for a lot of communities to give their own opinion about the history. It's more visible and more hearable, I don't know if you can say that, than before. So he said that now the question of the past and the meaning of the past is this kind of the same kind of discussion we can have on health or environment and sustainable development, and everyone can give his own opinion on that and say, I'm not agree with this view on your view on the history. And sometimes it's working, sometimes it's not working. So that's very interesting for him because he said that there is an empowerment, we can say, of the conflicts of interest on this question. It becomes more political than before. And it's thinking also, but it's maybe another problem, but it's thinking also that we are now not anymore in an age of the witness, like was thinking Annette Vivorka. Annette Vivorka is a historian in France. She's from the history of present time. And he said that now we are more in an age of the victim. So people saying, I was victim of this, not just I was witness of that, but I was victim of this, so I can give my own opinion on that. Okay. But by the way, it's something very important, I think, for library, because there is some convergence today between museum, archive, and libraries, and I think that there is something about living archives that is very important for librarians today. It's something like a new change, maybe more for public library. That in this moment there is this project in New York Public Library about oral history project, oral history, and they do that on different neighborhoods of New York. And this is completely the thing that librarians are interested to in this moment, about how the librarian can participate to the history and history of present time with this living archive. The second thing is quantity. The diversity of sources is very good, but there is a quantity, a very big amount of quantity of sources, of course with Twitter and things like that. And there is some researcher in this moment from NYU and from UCLA, and Howard Besser, maybe you know him from NYU, is working at the Taminant Library. And so he's working on what is the role of librarians for collecting the sources. And he say, and I will quote it, it's easier for me because I don't have to translate it. Many of the artifacts collected by libraries and archives, such as letters, emails, and other type of correspondence, posters, and this, etc., have been replaced in today's world by more atomized digital artifacts, such as blogs and social network postings and things like that. That are more connected to works originated by others. And in a world characterized by network information and collaborative authorship, the cultural institution collecting materials of historical and social importance will need to collect material coming from a variety of different sources, each with its own conception of metadata and file format standards. And that's very interesting. It means that for them, we need to work with the public, who's witnesses of the event, to think about the metadata. So this is also this question of standback. The historian has to put its own metadata as a scientific standback, I don't know, or do we have to use the witnesses, the living archive, also for metadata? Another thing maybe is, what I say, yes, preservation, acceleration. Yes, another problem with the sources, and this is the acceleration and the speed, the acceleration of time, acceleration of information, of course. There is the problem is, even if immediacy, I don't know if this word exists, immediacy is not actuality. Immediacy, thank you. Even if immediacy is not news, okay, the news flows, it means that how to build a collective memory with this immediacy, and what is the role of the historian in this acceleration? Do we have time to build our memory? And for the colleagues of the immediate history school, they think that working on history is building the memory. But for some other philosophers, it's more complicated. For example, for Virilio, is encouraging people to make what he called ecology of time. So sparing the time and trying not to. It is criticizing the idea that there was a standardization of opinions and now there is a synchronization of emotions. So it's more encouraging people to take time to studying the facts and things like that. So this is the problem is for him to how to keep the history as a scientific object, leading. We want to reach, yes, reaching a common good, and not something like very affective, trying to reach a community of affect. So that's his point. One of the main problems, in fact, with immediate history, that's a question of subjectivity. Even if a lot of historians say that there is no problem, there is no controversy. It's, for example, Prochasson, this is a French historian, he said it's completely an illusion to think that the work of the historian is a collective and anonymous work. There is all the time the tracks of the researcher inside. And it was the case with Michelet, you know Michelet? Jules Michelet, it's an historian. I think there is some historian in the room, I think. Some say yes. Jules Michelet, so it's a French historian, there is a lot of polemics around Michelet, but for Michelet, he thinks that there is no history without historian. That it's not possible. There is all the time the historian inside the history. And for Marc Bloch, it's more obvious, because for him, it's because we have this experience of life that we can have this scientific discourse on history. So even the subjectivity is, for them, it's not a limit, but of course, we have to think about these difficulties, because for some other, it's the problem is not if there is a subjectivity or not. There is a subjectivity. The problem is that we have to explain to the people that they need to read the history with the same, the same careful comportment, we can say careful behavior, than we read any documents. So it's not because it's done by the historian that it becomes something completely scientific. It's scientific, science is not something unsubjective. So, for continuing, this history is possible also because we have some tools for that. So some tools that we know, like, I don't know, we know now, but we didn't know a few years ago, digital humanities. We also have maps, that's something very hard, but we have also new tools for doing maps, timelines. I remember when I was a kid, I do my timelines with, rule and there. But it's changed now. I do my timelines online with some Excel sheet or things like that, and data creation, of course. But what is interesting about acceleration of time is that these tools are used in the same time for treating the data and spreading the data and spreading the results. For example, when I do digital humanities, it can be just for making visualization of my data as a historian, but it's also to make this accessible. So there is a question in this tools of what time we have for analysis, where is the place of the analysis, what is the spread of the analysis, and not only of the visualization. There is something that I can't stand in this moment is in journalism. Sometimes, I don't know if it's the same case in the US, but in France it's obvious. Now, some journalists, they like to just give you some infographics. Nothing else. It's enough. You have all the data, and it's nice, and there is a nice design, and it's very hipster design, and that's great. And what is your opinion on that? And of course, you can read the opinion, because you can see that you use some data more than other, but because you are used to that. But for the public, in fact, there is no clue, no key to understand what it's thinking really. So that's something that I can't stand. And yes, for me, the age of the design. So that's the danger of this kind of tools. And about the question of journalism, data journalism, sometimes I was explaining to my students how to use some tools for, in a poster, scientific poster, what kind of tools they can use to make visualization of the data. And a lot of the tools are explained in websites of journalists, data journalists, extra. And once I was explaining this to one of my students, and he made some study of history, and he said, it's not journalist, it's history. I say, yes, it's history. If it's history because there is a treatment of the data, and you can work on these events, and of course you can do history of that, but the main part of people explaining how to use the tools, today they are journalists. So there is something, when you do some immediate history, something on journalist historian, and you really have to know what is to be historian now. The second problem of this kind of tools is the technical skills. That's very difficult, in fact, to do, I don't know, XML, TE, things like that. So it's not so evident for everyone. So I think that, of course, we can use some tools like I do with Google and some things like that, a Google Sheet that is the timeline software, take it directly on my Google Sheet, and it's okay. You can do things like that, but you can also consider that research is it's a project team, and the researcher has to go back in a team not of historians, but a team with IT crew, technicians, librarians, and things like that. And for now in France, it's not so obvious. By the way, it's not because the researcher in history has to be in a collective that he can have a subjective point of view. It's not being anonymous. It's just being the one that do the analysis and say, with my data, I want this. The visualization is made by other, but you're still the one who think about what to do with the data. So that was my question about methodology. So my methodology now, when I do my research, my own research about digital library and academic libraries. So as I said, we had some difficulties in France when we began with the digital question about, do we call that a digital library? Do we call that an electronic library? How we call that, this kind of program concept? It was digitalized document, or it was a native digital document. And what about, I don't know, some documents like, I don't know, thesis, for example, or work students? We have some we have to digitalize, and some that we have now directly on an electronic version. So I really see for when I was in my former library that we had a problem with the concept and with the vocabulary. An example, we had this LibQual assessment, and I was in charge of communication, but I was beginning since 2 months. And we had the results of the former LibQual assessment. And students wrote, it would be so great to have access to your resources from a distant way, not in the library. And I read that and said, but it's 2 years we have. 2 years that we propose these services, and no one knows what happened. So I was just beginning as a communication officer, so I went to find the communication my colleague had done 2 years before to explain that we have this service. And it was some poster, very nice, very designed, with picture of the website and writing in big, the library has a new portal. It's obvious, no? Yes, Michael.
Do you know why the digital library name came about in the US? People have been using electronic libraries, and in 1993, the Clinton administration decided they wanted a new name so they could say they were doing something new, and that's why it was changed.
Really? I didn't know that. I will add it on my next...
One of the NSF program was called the Digital Library Program.
Yeah, I think we had this kind of problem in France, but 10 years after, or 6 years after at least. But yes, that was the problem. That was we used some words that students don't understand, and by the way, a lot of librarians didn't understand, because if you say to me, oh, I open a new portal, it don't mean for me that I can have access to it on a distant place. So for me, that was a problem. And my colleague, Benoît Epron, is working on, I'm looking for my paper, sorry, is looking on economy, digital economy, and the use of digital resources in libraries. So together, we were invited in Romania in 2012 to work on this subject. And then we began. So our question was, what communication about digital objects in academic libraries during the last 15 years? So that was what we want to do. I said it was an attempt to write it. So the problem was, first, what we... Oh, I wrote in French, I'm sorry. I forgot to translate.
We know what it means.
Sorry. about the time, what kind of historical time we want to study. In fact, we didn't want to do that. We just wanted to make a vocabulary analysis, a linguistic analysis. We didn't want to make an history. We had not this kind of imagination. We just want to work on communication questions. And but finally, we had this problem with sources that lead us to think about historical analysis. So what the sources are? That's what. So first thing, we try to research communication materials. So I don't know, posters, flyers, and things like that. First problem, there is no. There is some posters, there is some tracts and flyers and things like that, but no one knows where they are. There is no archive of the communication in France, no. In fact, in France, we begin to do some communication for assuming doing some communication in library, what you call marketing library, since, I can say, 7 years. Before that, it was very prohibited. If you say, I do marketing of library, people say, what? But it's something for, I don't know, selling yogurts or things like that. So it's not for librarians. We are pure, we are not like this. So if someone do some poster before that, no one care. And no one care, and no one keep it. That was the problem. So no archives of that. So we say, yeah, but we could find maybe some ideas of this vocabulary and on the strategic documents of the library. So we called some librarian, director of a library, and we say, do you have your strategic documents since 20 years? They try to find. No. Why no? No idea where it is. Do you mean you have no archives of your library? No. In France, archive and library is two words. We have not the same examination to become archivists or librarians. We have not the same school. We are not doing the same studies, and we are not working in the same area. We are not talking to each other. I think it will change, but for now, we are not talking to each other. I know no archivists. I don't know one. Our professional association are separate too. So when I asked my colleague about the strategic documents, some told me, yes, I remember there is a closet somewhere where we keep a lot of things, and maybe there will be someone who could spend 2 days looking for some documents. And I say, okay, try to do that. And some others told me, maybe there was some place, but the former director, when he left, he had everything on his own server, so I don't know where it is now. And we have no trace at all of the strategic documents of the library, of each library. So finally, we find one library, the library of Strasbourg, we call it, c'est la Bibliothèque nationale et universitaire de Strasbourg. It's also a national one. So I think that they are more on archive question than the other one. And they send us the archive they have, but that's the only one. The other, sometimes they have the last strategic plan, so the 5 last year, because now it's completely digital, it's native digital. But what happened before? They don't know where it is. So because we do this research, now we added in the national school, my school, some class of archive to the next. Rebecca said, I'm conservateur of library. Conservateur of library, we are supposed to be head librarians before, after the school. So now when you are trained to be head librarian, now you have some class about archives, and we open a new master about national digital archive. So it's because we do this research and we say there is a very big problem in France with that. We have no idea of what happened in our library if we want to do this history. This history now, but even this history in, I don't know, 100 years, we have nothing to understand what is the evolution of our job and profession. So we continue and trying to have the research of official and institutional documents, because we think that maybe they could have something. So we find, of course, things, because the government is keeping good trace of their archives, of course, but we have the same limit with professional association. So professional association, they do the same thing that the other librarians. They say, ah yes, someone should have done that, but I don't know why. So finally, we went on the web archive to consult different website evolution. It was the last thing we can do. And but we can find every website on the different step of their website. So it was a bit of failure too. And finally, the step that we never did, but that was a mistake. It's because at this moment I wasn't aware about the history of time, present time and things like that. So we don't think about living sources. In fact, we could have contacted some colleagues in, I don't know, in positions in 20 years and say, hey, you, do you remember how do you speak to the students at this moment about digital objects and things like that? We could have done that with a sociological methodology or, I don't know, anthropological methodology, something like that. And, but at this moment, we have no idea of doing this. We have not the background for that. And we are, I'm not very young, but I'm too young to remember that because Benoit and I, we are born the same year, and we are in the profession since the same year, so 2007. So we have no idea of what before that. We are not in the, we were not, I don't know, I'm not from a family of librarians, so never heard about. And maybe it's why we didn't think about asking that. So I didn't do that now. I haven't done it now, finding living sources, but I'm encouraging people to do this, to not forgetting, to asking colleagues that have this memory, because we need their memory to understand our profession, in fact, because there is so much evolution that we need it. And we need it, I don't know if we need it, but we can do it, so why not? So finally, that's what we wanted, and I forgot to translate it again. Sorry, I don't do the difference between French and English, that's why. So we want some institutional reports, we want some documents from the professional association, we want some documents, communication documents from every library, the strategic reports of libraries, and some statistics. That was important. So finally, what we had, it was this. So for communication, nothing. ADBU is a professional association. That's in France we have, I don't know, 40 professional associations. It's not like ALA. We don't have a big thing like that with a lot of division. We have a lot of division, and that's all. Don't have the main thing. So ADBU is the association of the director of academic library, and we have their communication only since 2010. So we made our research in 2012. We have just 2 years of archives. That's crazy. ABF is the professional association for all French librarians. And we find their communication since 2000 to 2007. But between 2007 and 2012, I don't know. Maybe they don't do, maybe they don't keep. We don't know. The ministry we find, the IGB is how we call that, the inspection, the general inspection of libraries. So same, 2005, 2011. We don't have the 2012 because they need time to publish in 2012 we have 2011 and things like that. The National and Academic Library of Strasbourg, we have 2000, 2011. And ASIBU, it's a statistic, and we have, that's the one we have the more important information. So that was a bit, how we can say that, disappointing. And just to show you, we find some things. We find some date and events and things like that. So we made a timeline. So it was our timeline with all the information we found with all these documents. We created a timeline to try to understand if there was some germ permutation and something like a pattern. We try to find a pattern with this. So this is just to, okay, I think I've lost my, yep. Okay, so this is a timeline verite.co. It's now I'm using another one that you can find on this. I will not show you, but it's the same kind of software.
Raphaelle, can I ask just a point of clarification? So when you're talking about the historical record, what's the institution that you are proposing should house this or should have it?
Excuse me, that's a good question. For communication, for example, I think we have two possibilities, and I'm trying to work on these two possibilities at this moment. For posters, flyers, things like that. One possibility is to do that on ABF. ABF, this is the Association for French Librarians. And we could imagine they keep this, because they have, we could say the force, the people who could send their, they have an audience, okay? So they could ask every library to send the documents and keep it. It could be picture. We just need picture, in fact. It could be this kind of archive. And another end is there is Enssib, so my school. This is a national school. So we try to ask other librarians to send us their documents, and we could keep it and make some archives, but it's a huge work, because there is, I don't know how many libraries in France, but a lot of libraries. Every small village has its own library, so they can do a lot of poster, communication, everything. Even if we are working on academic libraries, there is 100 academic libraries. Okay, it's small compared to here, but we are a small country, so it's quite the same. And so this year we are trying a thing. We are training the future librarian in my school, and we give them a project for the year. And the project is it's a management project, and to see how we could do that in the school, because we need to have people working on how to do this kind of archive of what we call ephemerals documents. Ephemeral documents, thank you. So that's the point now, is how to have a collection of ephemeral documents in our school, and they are working on that.
Yeah, because I'm sitting here thinking about a sort of almost in a way like a parallel problem or challenge maybe that's maybe related to what you're talking about would be like how we teach, like the pedagogy in the institution. I mean, who's archiving all the syllabi from like way back when to when, and it could very well parallel the profession too. It would be interesting to see how we're teaching it and how it's being practiced, and whether there's a parallel or connections. I don't know.
Completely. I met some guys in Colombia library, and they are working on the digitalization of the syllabus for making this kind of history of the pedagogy and the thematic also. So yes, that's completely the same thing. And in fact, we have now the tools to think about the conservation of our present time. That's what I think is a challenge for librarians. But for that, we need to figure that it's important to have a history of our profession. And that's not so obvious for French librarians. I don't know here, but for French librarians, it's not so obvious that we need to have some studies about our own profession. What is important is to be a corpse, not a corpse. No, it's a body, sorry. It's a French. Yes, to be a body, and to have this strong affective community. But having some studies on that, they don't think that's the most important now. Because today we have this, what you know here since a long time, but this advocacy process. And for librarians today, this year, there was in my school, there is a big event called the Festival. We do it about what is the value of libraries today. The ADBU, so the Director of Academic Library, they do it also about the value of the academic library. So in this moment, there is a big thing about what is our value, and we are not thinking about how to study this value. What is the materials we have for that? There is a shift between, we could say a gap, in fact, between the librarians and studies on library science. And by the way, library science doesn't exist in France, you know? There is no such thing. We have information science, communication science, but no library science. It's not an existing, we have no number in library science. It's not a discipline. So it's difficult.
Can I ask you another question? Were you able to examine some of the publications, like the journals produced by professional organizations? Because sometimes in the American journals, they would have a picture of a poster, or they would have materials that would constitute a campaign or part of a campaign in the library world.
We didn't do that, but we were looking for the, yes, some paper. We have two major publications about library, and as I say, it's not scientific because it's not a discipline in university. So we have the BBF, it's built-in library, French library, and sometimes there is some picture, but not all the time. For example, it could be something about communication without picture. And so, the second one is a magazine, and it's from ABF, the association, and there is not all the time some picture about the communication things. Why? Because it was really a problem. We couldn't say we do some communication. I was the first person to have a department of communication in an academic library in France. It was in 2009. And my boss was very interested with this question, so he created that. But it was the first one. So that's something very new. And I can see the difference because when I was in charge of communication, I was invited a lot of time everywhere in France and say, how do you do that? Because no one do. We were very few, one in the academic library, one in public library, one extra. And now I'm teaching communication in library since 4 years. The first year, I only have some people who say, I'm interested with, I would like to know things about that. Okay. And now I have people that are in charge of communication. They say, I come to your class because I'm in charge of communication in my library and I would like to know better about this. So there is a big change in that. So now, yes, there is, this kind of challenge. People want to do a good communication. They want to show it to everyone, but it's very new. Something I do since 1 year and a half, I think, is I created a Pinterest about communication in library in France, and I ask everyone I teach or I train to send me their communication with pictures, things like that, and I try to keep it like that.
When you say communication in libraries, what does that cover?
It's really, it's marketing the library for patrons. And so patrons in academic library, so it's a researcher, the students, but also the what we call the grand public, because academic library in France, this is public place, so everyone can come in. So we have this kind of thing. And what we call communication is, I think that's what you call outreach and
marketing.
Yeah. Marketing, outreach, and advocacy. Sometimes it depends if you are also your target is the president of the university or money. Yes, yeah. But it's not exactly working like that in France. So that's something very new also for us to speak about money. So yes, that's so I try to do with this Pinterest to have a place where putting some picture of the communication, and that's interesting because in doing that I discovered some new services in some libraries that I didn't know that some people were doing this in France. And I say, wow, one of my colleagues sent me the picture of a poster. They live in the streets in their city. It's a small city in France. And this is there is some books and some QR code, and you can flash the code and read the 10 first page of the book. I have no idea that someone was doing this in France. So that's very important also for the continuing professional development to know what the others are doing. Okay. The only thing we do as preservation of communication, poster, tracts, it's about LibQual. There is a strong community in France of librarians using LibQual assessments. And they created a wiki, and in this wiki there is a place for communication tools. And you can find the communication on LibQual since 6 years now. But this is the only thing. And I think we can do more.
I wonder if it would be possible to see the Pinterest that would come from, you know, if we have the technology to see the Pinterest.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's connected to.
I think possible. I need to find it, but so it's on my name. So you see I have poster, Signalytics, it's Signage, and I have one about communication. I am this kind of person mixing my life, professional and private, on internet. Maybe my husband thinks it's not a good thing. So this is this one. Oh, I need to give my, but you can see the thing. So I put this pictures and posters, and when people send it to me, and some created some Pinterest too, and they put their poster on their Pinterest, and I take it. That's the thing we try to do, and we also trying to create. I can't find anymore the diffusion.
You want to expand it? Oh,
Okay. What is this? I don't know what I want to say. It's not one. So the results. So on this, what we try to do after that with my colleague is thinking that can we do something with what we found? Can we have a view on this history of the digital documents, digital objects, because it could be documents, it could be something else, in libraries with that. So what we try to do is taking the historical object for Lightning, we can say the place of the digital object in two things, in a context of the evolution of the digital question, but also in the context of the evolution of academic libraries, because there was a lot of change during the last 20 years in academic libraries and in academic field in general, because you know the Bologna process, maybe the LMD transition. In France we have also the law for autonomy of university and things like that that made a big difference in how we. Yes, sorry.
I just want a little translation. You say,
oh yes, sorry, I forgot.
No, that's okay. So you say of the evolution of
the evolution of the place of the digital question in libraries.
No, so my question is specifically, well, I mean, to me the rest is, you could explain all, but my question is about numérique and what does it mean in this context?
That's exactly what we try to do. So I will answer you that, because the fact is that our conclusion is that we have a history on these 15 years on going from the electronic, numeric as electronic,
Numeric is the one,
to numeric as digital. We have this kind of history. So, and the second thing is, what is the challenge for the academic libraries today for accompanying that? We call that the dialectic of the digital library, and you will understand why. So first, the first time we can find the first step was 1999 to 2005. At that, academic libraries and electronic resources. At this moment, library was really speaking about electronic resources. It was the time of the Bologna process and LMD reform, and in fact, academic libraries were really about rethinking the collection by educational level. You know, that was the main problem for academic library at this time. We are thinking, yes, do we need to have an N collection, a M collection, a D collection, D is doctoral, and things like that. So electronic resources was at this moment for the librarian just another kind of collection. We had with the same issues, I could say, of indexation, access, acquisition. It doesn't change completely the pattern of the library. In fact, it was just an extension of the traditional library. It doesn't change anything. The librarianship is the same praxis. The access was inside the physical library, and the only concern was really about the financial aspects. So, and specifically with the LMD process was what kind of money we have for electronic resources for M, for D, for L, and etc., etc. And we have, like in every university, much more students in L than in M and D. But the electronic resources are more for M and D, and they are more expensive than print collection. So that was the concern. And for the relation with the public, what is interesting is that the way to access the electronic resources was inside the library, in the physical library, and so in the physical limits of the library. So it doesn't change anything to the relation to the public. You have to come here.
We have 15 minutes and
All right.
we really have to get out. So.
Okay. The second step was 2006, 2009. I called that the libraries on the web. So at this moment, there was the academic libraries in France become really aware of the internet challenges. Before that, of course, we know internet, of course, but they were not really aware of that. It's very obvious in the communication of the professional association and also of the strategic plan of the library. We have the document. Yes, there is really a moment they say, wow, we should go on internet. That was really in 2006. Why? Because of the high-speed individual access condition. Because it was growing the individual access. So academic library tried to continuing with that, and also the emergence of social media was changing everything. I was in 2006 in school for librarians, and we begin to have in France in 2006 the Facebook and blog and extra, and it was very new for us. So my generation, I'm the promotion 15, and my promotion is known for being the first one to bring social media in the library. So it was interesting for this moment is interesting in question of territory. The digital question is no more a question of collection but of territory. In fact, we need Latour. We know Latour is a sociologist, you know, maybe. Is writing about libraries in our journal in my school, and he said that it was a time for a new ubiquity of libraries and librarians. There was the idea also that the meaning of collection work is not central now. It's not important. What was important is where was the possibility to access. So the access was outside of the physical library. What was very funny at this moment, it was that I began to be in library at this moment, and I was in charge of communication just after that in 2009. But in this moment, it was very funny how the library wanted to be outside of the library. Only that. We have to be on the social media, we have to be on the blog, we have to be on the website and things like that. That's really the beginning of that for us. A lot of libraries before that don't have proper websites. They have websites in the university or they have websites in the city, etc., but not their proper one. So they begin to have that. So librarianship is more at this moment about valorization, collaboration, communication, partnership than before, where we was still question of indexation and acquisition and traditional thing. And also the mission is not only a collection for students, but now it's being visible, being used. And the fact is, at this moment, we began to have this, I said about the law about autonomy, and what we call LRU, that's autonomy, and the LOLF, it's a law about financial question. this law is very important. This is the beginning in France of if you want money, you have to say what you want to reach. That's completely new for us. Before that, you say, oh, if we do a digital library, and someone say, okay, good idea. And now if you want money for that, you say, if I had some digital library, I could do that, and I could reach that, and I could reach that, so give me money. Oh, okay, it's a good idea. Before that, no, we just say, hey, good idea, everyone do digital library, I need to do one, okay, good. So it changed completely, and the focus was, for acquisition, the focus was about assessment and negotiation. Before that, we were concerned with the financial, and now we are concerned with the assessment at this moment. First step, 2010, 2012. As you can see, the time is reducing. There is an acceleration of each phase. This is the digital age of academic libraries. The keyword of that is hybridity. So in this moment, at this moment, for the librarians, they were aware that they need new competencies, they need new skills, like not only building collection, not only giving access, but building the bridge between the two. So so what we call in France mediation, and creating, the what you call here maybe the curation, and but for us it's very new using this term. Bruno Latour, for example, said at this moment it was the library. The role to library is to reinvent a synthesis of the information that are splitting everywhere. So the role has completely changed for the academic library is to create a new knowledge and to give access to that. So it's more about, not about electronic resources or native digital resources, it's to create a digital mediation. That was the point. And about the time, it was a moment where in France we were thinking on institutional point about what we call politique de site. It's about thinking the place of the library inside the campus, and also the relation between all the academic library. For example, we do not have at this moment a national license for the journals, online journals. And it's 10 years that they try to work on that. So that was really the point. They really want to find a way to have this kind of national and presence on sites, in fact. Okay. And I think that we are now in a new age, so 2012, 2004, and I don't know, I should say ... But for me, it's a new stage for now, because in France, actually, the French academic library in France are very interested, as here, of course, about this question of open access, open data, open library, etc., open everything. So, if I forgot to say for this one, the access is within and outside the physical library. It can be strange, but in France we built a lot of new libraries. And these new libraries are built on the idea that you have to find place for being in, being out the library. We could say we think that everything is outside, so we don't need to build a new, for example, in NYU, with Sandy's health library has been totally damaged. And they decided not rebuilding and doing completely virtual. In France, it's totally the difference. They said we have to create some new space that we call in France learning center. I know that here it's not the same, that's something very hard for you, but for us it's not exactly what we call learning center. So the idea is to think the library in a learning space with some other services of the university to create a space that is a place to learn with access to electronic resources, to possibility to make some mediation, etc. But for this one, the idea of open access, open data, open library, it's a new access. It's not only access to collection, it's also access to the data of the library itself. It's also thinking the library has a more political part of the national territory, but also the globalization. And on the question of acquisition, the question is no more how I will build my collection, but if I can do this mediation with the other, like for example with the students, with the researcher, but also with the grand public. So in this moment we are talking about co-construction and participation. For librarianship, it's important because it means that we are not only about mediation, but also about digital humanities and data curation.
You really have to want that.
Yeah, because they are outside. And so the new mission now is being part of the society, not just being part of the campus. So there is a lot of challenges for academic librarians in this now, because of this moment. And to be very quick, of course we need to learn about these new tools and training students to, in France for now, students are not trained to digital curation and digital humanities. And the second problem is that research libraries, we consider for now in France that academic libraries are ready for students. We don't think about ourselves as research library. And for something very specific, that I know here that the librarians are part of the faculty. Some librarians, head librarians maybe, are part of the faculty. In France, the head librarian, the conservateur, are supposed to be scientific faculty too. But in fact, no one knows. And the librarians themselves consider they don't have to really to do that. So they don't do research and they don't do publish. We don't need to publish. There is no tenure, for example, for librarians in France. We don't need to publish. We don't need to be specialist. I was specialist of the medical collection. I never heard about medicine before, and okay, it was not a problem. So that's the problem. The second thing is the advocacy and values. I think that in this moment we are more thinking about how to work, how to have money from the president of the university, than thinking about the values of the library in the social space in general. The Knight Foundation here in USA think that the academic library, as the public library and other institution, is part of the possibility of a civic engagement of the people. So that's something that we are not really aware in France about the political force of the academic library. And that's because participation and communication are not enough developed, I think. And I think my point is that we really have to develop the embedded librarians in labs, in research labs. So it would be a way to succeed that. And sorry, I was very fast for the end, but I like to talk, sorry. So that's it. Sorry.
Thank you so much.
Thank
This
you.
is very